Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is a very special episode because it is episode 50. That's right, we have reached 50 episodes of the podcast. Believe me, I had no idea that I would make it this far, and it's only because of all the incredible support you all have given me over these past 2 years. Truly, thank you so much for continuing to listen and for helping keep the spirit of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise alive. Now, to celebrate this milestone episode, I wanted to do something a little special, and I figured, why not dive into the weird and wacky world of forgotten and canceled Pirates of the Caribbean media and dredge up some things you may have never heard of or have simply forgotten about. We'll be going through a bunch of different pieces of content, some from the real world, some comics, some games, and more. So buckle up and prepare to learn about some of the strangest pieces of Pirates lore. First up, we have something that I learned about pretty recently, and this is something that I would be shocked if many of you knew about. But before I reveal what it is, let's get some background information established. So, Pirates of the Caribbean was a big deal in the early 2000s. That's a given. I feel like we all know that. But the excitement when Pirates 2 and 3 were announced and being filmed was monumental, and the popularity of the Pirates franchise was insane. I wish every day that I could go back and experience the fandom back then, as I was only 4 years old in 2006. So a lot of the fandom stuff from that time are things that I have read about after the fact, and some of these things I just wish I could have experienced in person. Like this weird piece of Pirates media. So these days, the look-alike contest trend is something that has taken the world by storm in the past few years. But you know what was the pioneer in the look-alike contest world? That's right, the Pirates of the Caribbean look-alike contest, more famously known as the Jack Sparrow look-alike contest. This was an official event that was put on by the toy company Zizzle. Zizzle, of course, was the company that made all of the Pirates of the Caribbean toys for Dead Man's Chest and At World's End. Now, it is known for being a Jack Sparrow look-alike contest, but it was originally meant to be a Pirates of the Caribbean look-alike contest where the judges were looking for 3 winners. They were looking for a Jack Sparrow, a Will Turner, and an Elizabeth Swann. But since most of the participants were dressed as Jack Sparrow, all 3 winners ended up being Jack Sparrow lookalikes. This contest took place on June 13th, 2006, and was held in New York City at the FAO Schwarz store. Now, when I first learned about this, I needed to find out more, so I rummaged around the internet a lot, and I ended up stumbling upon a video uploaded by Toby Markham, who happens to be the second place winner of the lookalike contest. Big shout out and thank you to Toby, because his YouTube video is the only photo and video evidence of this event ever existing. Without that video, we would only have the announcement of the contest happening, which was posted on Keep to the Code, which was the Pirates of the Caribbean forum at the time, and on a site called Toy News International. But I will link Toby's video in the episode description if you want to check it out, and please do. It's super fun, and if you do watch it, you'll understand what I'm about to talk about right now. So everyone who entered the contest had absolutely stellar costumes, whether they be Jack, Will, or Elizabeth. But there was this one guy who you can see in Toby's video who is, I don't even know how to describe him. The guy is wearing a yellow t-shirt and one of those Halloween stereotypical pirate hats. You know what I mean. And that's it. You may be asking, what character was he supposed to be? And I have no clue. Even he didn't know. In the video, the judges ask him who he is supposed to be, and he points to the cutout of Jack Sparrow behind him and says Johnny Depp. This is the quality humor that I live for, and I don't know if this guy entered the contest as a joke or if he actually thought he had a chance, but I just needed to bring that up. Pirate guy, if you're listening to this somehow, I salute you. But to describe the event a bit more, there was a panel of 4 judges. There was Janine DiGiacchino, who was the general manager of Madame Tussauds New York at the time. And there was also Noah Robinson, who was a photographer for Entertainment Weekly. There was Carolina Bermudez, who was a DJ for the New York radio station Z100, and the final judge was the president and CEO of Zizzle, Roger Schiffman. So these judges went through all the participants, and at the end, they selected 3 winners who all happened to be Jack Sparrows. Now, the grand prize for this contest was a Volvo XC90 that was filled with Zizzle Pirates toys, of course. Honestly, an incredible prize. The first place winner was Ron Rodriguez. Shout out to you, Ron, if you're listening. Second place prize was $2,500 and a chest of Zizzle Pirates toys, and this went to Toby Markham, as I said before. Finally, third place was $1,000 and a chest of Zizzle Pirates toys, and this went to Christopher Liedenfrost. Shout out to the winners if you guys are somehow listening, and thanks once again to Toby for posting the video of this event. Go watch it. I'll have it linked in the description. Also, let me know if you knew about this before this episode, because ever since I found out about this, I've been telling literally everyone I know about it. It's something that is so strange and hilarious, and I'm amazed that it even happened in the first place. And the fact that there is actually footage of it happening just makes it even better. It's one thing when you're just reading about it after the fact, but to actually have photo and video of something happening just makes it so much cooler. You can actually really experience what it was like back then. So thanks once again to Toby for uploading that video, because this is just super cool and also shows that once again, Pirates of the Caribbean is ahead of its time, since it came before all these trendy celebrity lookalike contests that have started happening in the past few years. But to pivot from the strange Jack Sparrow lookalike contest to our next piece of weird media, this is something that you probably have heard about, as I have mentioned it a few times throughout the podcast. And it's not so much weird as it is a canceled piece of Pirates media, and that is the Pirates of the Caribbean animated series that was to be named Swashbucklers. This was actually something that was in development around 2007 to 2008, but it was canceled for unknown reasons. Now, while Disney has never directly confirmed that the Swashbucklers show was ever in development, there are a bunch of pieces of evidence that allude to it. First and foremost is the insane amount of Pirates merch with the Swashbucklers art style. And also, this is why I personally dubbed this art style the Swashbucklers art style, as that would have been the name of the show. But you could see this art style everywhere. It was on kids' dinnerware, Christmas ornaments, party supplies, coin banks, lamps, bed sheets, you name it. There were also a few Adobe Flash games that were made at the time with this art style as well, like Pirates Conquest, Depths of the Dutchman, and my personal favorite, the GOAT of Flash games for me, Cursed Cave Crusade. That was my exposure into gaming as a kid. And also that game is way harder than it needs to be. Like, I've only beaten it once. But anyway, besides those things, there are bigger things that allude to this canceled show. And first and foremost are the plethora of comics that were made in the Swashbucklers art style. Most of these could be found in the Disney Adventures magazine at the time, but there were also some longer ones that were only published in the Pirates of the Caribbean magazine. This was only available overseas for some reason. It was never published in the United States, but there were 14 issues and they featured comics in each issue, many of those being exclusive to the magazine. If you remember, I did cover some of the Pirates comics in the past. However, those were the comics that were made after The Curse of the Black Pearl and before Dead Man's Chest. In the future, I will cover these Swashbucklers comics along with the Pirates magazine ones, but for today, I'm mainly bringing up the fact that they existed, and there were a lot of them. In addition to the comics, there were also a line of action figures done in the Swashbucklers art style too. You may remember these from back in the day, and they specifically say Swashbucklers in large font on the packaging, which kind of confirms that that was the name of the show. But if you look on the back of the packaging, you'll see a few things. First off, there is a tagline at the top that says, "The excitement never ends with the Swashbucklers." This tagline also has the word swashbucklers in a much bigger font than the rest of the words, which adds more evidence to this theory. But this is a very interesting thing to be a tagline for these action figures. The name Swashbucklers only showed up on the packaging for these figures, and I don't know about you, but when I hear "the excitement never ends with the Swashbucklers," I think of like an old school cartoon tagline or something. It gives me those kinds of vibes. Also, besides this tagline on the right side of the back of the box, there is another little blurb, which I'll read here, and this adds more to the tagline being kind of a show description. So it says, "Never fear when the swashbucklers from the Pirates of the Caribbean are near. Join forces with Jack and the rest of your favorite pirate characters as they battle to control the seven seas." What does that sound like to you? Because this furthers my theory on this being a pseudo-show description. Also, the mention of battling to control the seven seas is the more interesting part because that wouldn't be thrown in there for no reason. If we were to guess at the plot of this animated series, it would probably entail, one episode adventures with different characters, and they're all trying to take control of the seven seas. Maybe it would bring in the pirate lords and go global with the mention of the seven seas, but that is my idea of what the show could entail. Something else I want to bring up, though, is another potential piece of confirmation for this show being real at one point or another. If you crack open your At World's End DVD or 2-disc special edition, there may be a little booklet inside there that shows a bunch of different Pirates of the Caribbean merch items and advertisements for them. Most importantly from all these is a page that shows animated maquettes of 5 Pirates of the Caribbean characters. These were made by Gentle Giant and limited to 1,000 of each character. They did Jack, Will, Elizabeth, Davy Jones, and Barbossa. Now, what art style do you think these maquettes were done in? That's right, the Swashbucklers art style. And also, if you don't know what a maquette is, it is something that is created, usually a small statue or a figurine of a character, that artists can then reference from different angles when they're animating said character. So we have maquettes of pirate characters done in the Swashbuckler style. This, to me, is just further proof that this animated show was in development at some point. Like, why else would you release these as limited edition collectibles? They had to be originally made for something, right? Also, side point, but these maquettes are super cool, and I have been hunting them down for a long time, or at least waiting to find ones at decent prices on eBay. But I now have the Will and Elizabeth ones, so I'm super happy about that. One day I hope to have all 5 of them, so we'll see if that happens. But they're also super big, like way bigger than I thought before I bought them. They are almost a foot tall, which is crazy. But to close this side tangent, these maquettes, along with the action figure line sporting the Swashbuckler's name, and the comics and all the rest of the merch made with the style, further drives home the idea that this was in development and was going to happen. Having this art style plastered on so much merchandise lets kids get familiar with the art style so that when they see the show, they recognize the designs and get their parents to buy the merchandise with those characters on them. I would love to know the reason why this show was canceled when it seemed like they put so much work into getting this art style off the ground. Having all these different departments synergizing together seemed like there was a reason behind it, and I am forever sad that we never got a Pirates of the Caribbean animated series. I would have loved this as a kid, and even now, I love me a good animated show, and Pirates of the Caribbean had the potential to be a great one. Now, the next weird piece of Pirates content actually ties into what we were just talking about, and this is something you might remember. There was a Zizzle Pirates toy, specifically the Jack Sparrow's spitting dagger toy, and this included something that I have dubbed the mysterious Davy Jones dagger. Why do I call this mysterious? Well, there is zero mention of this dagger anywhere in the movies, in the books, even in the comics. But if you look up pictures of this toy, you'll see this dagger that I'm talking about. I actually still have this. It's on my Pirates of the Caribbean shelf. But the reason I call it the Davy Jones dagger is because there is nothing Jack Sparrow about it. Other than the fact that the toy comes with Jack's wristband, which is what the dagger attaches to, this has nothing to do with Jack. But the design of the dagger is interesting as it depicts the Kraken on here. And if you look closely at the way the Kraken is depicted on this dagger, it is done in the Swashbuckler's art style, which furthers my theory on this maybe being something that would have been showcased in the Swashbuckler show if it ended up being made. The dagger is really cool looking, and I mean, it is too much of a coincidence that it has a cartoony design. This had to be for the show. But since it was canceled, we now have this toy dagger with no purpose other than the fact that it looks super cool. The most interesting part of this to me is the fact that I have never seen anyone talk about this dagger or mention it in any capacity. It is this forgotten design that may have been a teaser for the animated show, But with it being canceled, we will never know the lore behind this dagger. It must have had something to do with the Kraken since it is depicted on the dagger, but what purpose it would have served, we don't know. But I wanted to bring this up here since it does kind of tie into the Swashbucklers animated show. Alright, now we're going to move on to our next piece of Forgotten Pirates content, and this is yet another canceled project, specifically a video game. A few of you may know about the Pirates of the Caribbean video game called Armada of the Damned, and this was going to be an RPG game set in the Pirates world that would have been released on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC. It was set to release sometime in 2011, but it was canceled in October of 2010. Why was it canceled? Well, the studio that was working on it was named Propaganda Games, and they also created the game Tron Evolution, which was being made to tie in with Tron Legacy in 2010. But a few months before Tron Evolution's release, Disney Interactive Studios, which was Disney's game division at the time, announced a restructuring program that resulted in the Armada of the Damned team being laid off. The rest of the studio finished Tron Evolution, but after the mixed reception to that game, Propaganda Games was shut down entirely. And it's really unfortunate as Armada of the Damned looked super cool, and it was very far into development. They released trailers and were even marketing the game before it was canceled. But we're going to take a deep dive into what this game would have been and theorize on what could have happened within it. So let's get into it. Now, this game would have been kind of similar to Mass Effect, where you play as a specific character and you will make choices throughout the game that will affect the story, your character's appearance, and how people will react to you, stuff like that. In this game's case, you would play as a pirate named James Sterling, and your goal was to become either a legendary pirate or a dreaded pirate, kind of similar to how in Mass Effect you could choose between either Paragon or Renegade options, with the one side being the more righteous and the other side being the darker side. Same thing here, the legendary path would be the good path, where you would be building your reputation as a famous pirate, and if you embraced the dreaded path, you would lean more into the cursed approach and be a darker scourge and terror on the seas. Just from that point alone, this game seems super cool. The game would require you to choose either legendary or dreaded early on, but you could still make choices from either side during dialogue options or quests. You would have also been able to explore the Caribbean, and you could sail your ship on the seas and engage in ship-to-ship combat, and you could also fight hand-to-hand on land. There would have been plenty of quests, both main story quests and side quests, and overall, it seemed like this could have been a super awesome game. It really seemed like they were trying to make a Pirates of the Caribbean version of Mass Effect. And if this game had actually been released, I think it would have done incredibly well. It would have been a fully fleshed out pirate RPG where you could truly affect the world with your decisions and upgrade your ship and unlock new skills depending on your chosen path. So that's pretty much everything we know about the gameplay part of the game, and there is some gameplay on YouTube if you want to go check that out, but let's dive into what we know about the story of the game. For starters, there is a cinematic trailer they had released, which you can also find on YouTube, and that gives us a general overview of what the premise of the story would have been. As far as the setting of the game, timeline-wise, it would have been before any of the movies, and more specifically, around 10 to 15 years before The Curse of the Black Pearl. But we see in the cinematic trailer what would have probably been the start of the game. So from information I have been able to glean from the Pirates Wiki, at the beginning of the game, James Sterling, who is the main character, would be in a battle near a place called the Antilles Gate. And in this battle, he is killed by a Spanish admiral named Maldonado, and he would sink down to the bottom of the ocean, where Sterling would then come into contact with the actual Armada of the Damned. The Antilles Gate is where the Armada lies, and there is a whole fleet of ghost ships lurking below the Antilles Gate. The captain of the Armada would resurrect Sterling, and also give him a choice to accept a curse. This would be where you would choose to be either legendary or dreaded. By rejecting the curse, you chose legendary, which of course would set you on the path to become a famous and notorious swashbuckler. But if you accept the curse, you will choose the dreaded path and become the most dreaded pirate on the seas. But after this encounter, James Sterling would wash up on the shore of an island, and on this island would be a wrecked ship named the Nemesis. This would end up being Sterling's ship, and you would go around the Caribbean to find the scattered pieces of the ship. I assume this would probably be the first part of the game, and depending on what path you chose, the appearance of the Nemesis would change. It would be very nice and elegant if you were legendary, and more cursed and eerie if you were dreaded. So you would go and find the scattered pieces. For example, the figurehead was on an island named Apawiwato, and this is actually the footage you can find on YouTube of this specific quest. This island happens to be populated by cannibals who thought that the figurehead was a statue of a goddess. So they removed the idol sitting in the volcano of the island and put the figurehead there instead. But by doing this, they cursed themselves, and the cannibals begin to transform into crab-like monsters of some kind. When you find the figurehead and the idol, you are able to make a choice here to either keep the idol and let the tribe die from the curse, or you can return it to them and break their curse. This is just one of the decisions that would have affected the world. Another part of the Nemesis you would have to recover is the wheel, and this for some reason was placed in the palace of Admiral Maldonado, who was the man who killed James Sterling earlier. I assume there would probably be a boss battle here maybe, and I would guess the game would let you choose to either kill or spare Maldonado. That's my guess. After you repair the Nemesis fully, you would then go and search for the imprisoned spirit of Calypso, which is one of the biggest story beats in the game. Apparently, the Nemesis is the only ship capable of venturing to the place where the spirit of Calypso is entombed in a crystal. But that's essentially everything we know about the story of Armada of the Damned, but there's still a bunch of stuff to talk about. The interesting thing is how the game would have incorporated Tia Dalma and Calypso pretty heavily, as I believe Sterling ends up meeting Tia Dalma at some point in the game. But it seems that there would have been a heavy influence on the story of how Calypso was bound in human form, and potentially trying to free her. Now, there is a piece of art from the game that has popped up a few times, and you may have seen it, but it is a painting depicting the binding of Calypso in human form, and it is actually super cool, but it ties into the game since on the right side of the painting you can see the Antilles Gate in the background, and on the left side there is a gathering of notable looking figures along with some other figures who are depicted as actually pulling Calypso down with ropes. Now, we know that Calypso was imprisoned in human form by the First Brethren Court, so it is assumed that this group of figures on the left side here are actually the pirate lords of the First Brethren Court. In the middle, there are three figures who are performing a ritual with the crystal I mentioned earlier, and they are trying to entomb Calypso's spirit inside of it. And the most interesting part is on the right side. You can see a few pirates who are pointing at, or maybe sending away, a figure wearing a cloak. And I think overall, this painting shows the entirety of the binding of Calypso, where you can see the pirates pulling her down from the top of the mountain. And I think the cloaked figure on the right side is actually Calypso, now trapped in human form. If you look close at the hooded figure, however, you will see they look old and frail, which is interesting as we know Tia Dalma does not look old at all. But if you surf through the concept art for this game, you will stumble upon a piece of concept art of Tia Dalma, and what is extremely interesting is how she is an old woman in this concept art. She is wearing the same dress she wears in the films, but her hair is white, and she has a white shawl covering her face. It's very interesting, but with the old woman depicted in the Binding of Calypso painting, we can maybe assume that Calypso's original human form was an old lady, and maybe throughout this game you would help her, I don't know, try and help make her young again, or maybe she can do that herself, because this brings up a few questions since in the Young Jack Sparrow books, Tia Dalma isn't old. I'm pretty sure she looks how she does in the films. So this old lady appearance could just be how she looked immediately after she was bound to human form, as that happened, many years in the past. But that's my analysis of this concept art. Also, apparently, a few other movie characters would have appeared in the game, including Josh Me Gibbs, Ragetti, and Cutler Beckett. There is concept art of all three of them, but it is unknown as to what role they would have played in the game. But let's talk about the original characters that were created for the game. Of course, first up we have James Sterling, who is the main character, of course, as I said, and his appearance would change depending on what path you chose. Depending on your chosen path, your weaponry would change too. For instance, if you were on the dreaded path, you would be able to use this massive anchor that you could swing around in a circle to fight enemies. And for the legendary path, you would have had the traditional swords and a pistol. I'm not sure if you were locked into using these weapons for each path or if you could use them interchangeably, but besides that, we don't really know much else about James Sterling's, actual life. Really, the only thing we know about him besides what I've covered already is his necklace that he wears. If you look up a picture of him, you'll see it, which has a Spanish piece of 8 on it. According to the Pirates Wiki, this coin was all that was left of his family's wealth, and maybe this is what drove James Sterling to become a pirate. Next up we have Penny Finch, who is a red-headed pirate, and pretty much all we know about her is that she would have been James Sterling's first mate aboard the Nemesis, sort of like Anne Bonny in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, although apparently you would have been able to recruit various first mates. We only know of one of these characters, and that is Penny. We also have Admiral Maldonado, who I talked about a bit earlier. This is the guy who originally kills James Sterling at the beginning of the game, and I would assume he would have been the main villain, since they constantly reference the fact he is apparently evil. But then we have someone named Charlotte, who we know literally nothing about. But after surfing through some of the concept art, I came across a piece of art of what she looks like, and she has blonde hair and is wearing a red dress. I don't really know what her role would have been, but from how she is dressed, I think she might have been a wench in either Port Royal or Tortuga, as those are the 2 main hub areas in the game. Also, apparently, the real-life pirate Black Bart, aka Bartholomew Roberts, would have also appeared in the game, but there are no details as to why. Then we have Urzuka, who I assume is one of the first pirate lords, as he is depicted in the Binding of Calypso painting I talked about earlier. He is the guy in the front of the group of pirates on the left side. From his attire, he looks to be maybe Egyptian, and we have pretty much no idea about anything regarding his backstory, but there is concept art of a cursed version of Urzuka, as he has like an octopus stuck to the left side of his body. So he might have been a boss in the game, maybe, but that is everything we know about him. Now there is one more character to talk about, and I saved the best one for last. This is a character called the Red Duchess, and we actually have a good amount of information about her backstory. You can find concept art of her too, and for starters, her design is so cool. She is a French pirate, and she wears this massive wig, and she stores 5 daggers in different parts of the wig. She also wears a corset and has the petticoats of the bottom of her dress tied up like a sash. And overall, she has such a cool and unique design. Like, this just screams Pirates of the Caribbean to me when I look at a character like this. Definitely look up her concept art online. She just looks incredible. But for her backstory, thankfully, they put this on her concept art. And I feel like this makes her the character from this game we know the most about. So she was the daughter of a French sailor, and she became a royal courtesan at the age of 17. One day, however, she hears about the plans to assassinate King Louis XIV, and she tries to save him, but she ends up being blamed for conspiring to kill the king, and she retaliates by killing 2 noblemen to try and save herself. But she ends up being captured and is sentenced to be beheaded. However, she is able to escape with the help of a marquis who is madly in love with her, and she stows away on a ship bound for India. While on this ship, it ends up being attacked by pirates, and everyone aboard is killed except for her. She saves herself by becoming the pirate captain's mistress. And one night after the pirates capture a ship, the whole crew gets drunk, and the Red Duchess takes this opportunity to escape. She single-handedly kills every single one of the pirates and sails the ship by herself to Tortuga. Once there, she takes on the name the Red Duchess and becomes a pirate. How cool is that? This character is so unique, and her backstory is super cool, and this is another reason why I'll be forever sad this game was canceled. But that is pretty much everything we know about Armada of the Damned. There is a ton of concept art of the various characters and locations, so check that out if you want. The Pirates of the Caribbean wiki has a gallery of a ton of pieces of concept art if you want to sift through everything. But let's move on to our next piece of Forgotten Media, and this is yet another canceled item. You may remember or have heard about something called 6 Sea Shanties, and this was to be an anthology graphic novel featuring one main story and 6 different short stories set in the Pirates of the Caribbean world. It was originally going to be released on April 19th, 2011, but ended up getting delayed due to the production not being satisfied with the level of the artwork. What is interesting is that Terry Rossio read the book and posted about it on his Twitter, saying it was very well written. That was apparently on April 30th, 2011, but as you can obviously tell, the delay in release eventually became permanent, and the book was never released. Now, as to what we know about the stories that were to be included, this is where it gets interesting. Some stories we have descriptions of, others we have actual art from, and one of the stories was actually published, and we'll go through that in a bit. But the main story would have been a bunch of pirates gathering at the Faithful Bride as they begin to tell a bunch of stories. Then each pirate would go into telling their story, and that would kind of repeat for all 6 of the stories. That's what I assume the main story was supposed to be. But for the short stories, I'll start with the one we know the least about, and that was a story that was essentially supposed to be a prequel of some sort to On Stranger Tides. Apparently it would have featured Blackbeard and other new characters, but that's all we know about it. We know literally nothing else about it besides that description. Next up, we have a story about Jack Sparrow facing off against Jack the Monkey. Yes, that is actually what this story is about. We don't really have a description of the actual plot of the story, but we do have a few pages and panels of the story that were uploaded by the artist. There's no dialogue on these pages, it's just the art. But from what we have of this, we see Jack Sparrow in a rowboat tied to the stern of the Black Pearl. And I'm not sure why Jack is out here in this boat, but we see Jack the Monkey come down the line attaching the boat to the Pearl, and he is carrying a little plate of crackers with a glass of water. Jack the Monkey licks the crackers and then throws the plate at Jack Sparrow, and Jack is only able to save the glass of water. We also see Pintel and Raggedy are in this comic as they're watching from up on the Pearl's stern, but the second page has Jack the Monkey leaping at Jack Sparrow for the glass of water, I think, but Jack the Monkey misses and slams into the bottom of the rowboat. He then tries to jump out of the boat back to the rope, but Jack Sparrow grabs him and tries to throw him into the water, but Jack the Monkey is able to get back on the rope and scurries back up. The last panel we have of this is Jack shaking the rope, and Jack the Monkey is seen flying up into the air. Definitely an unhinged comic, and I would love to know what the story behind this was. Next up, we have the comic that apparently was titled Mermaids, and we have 3 pages of art from this one. Same thing as the last story, these pages have no text, but the visuals are very interesting. We don't know what role the mermaids would have played in this, as the pages we have don't feature them at all. All we see is Jack Sparrow in the ocean with a bunch of other sailors, and the ocean is also green, and I don't know if that was an artistic thing or if it had story implications, but Jack grabs onto a piece of driftwood, and he ends up being closed in by the pirates around him, and he wakes up and looks scared and begins to scream as the pirates close in. And that's it. That's really all we have about this one. The premise is very interesting, but without the context of the rest of the pages, it's really impossible to assume anything of what is happening in this comic. Then we have the comic called Last Shanghai, and we have 5 pages from this one. No dialogue still, but this one is very interesting. The first page we have sees Jack and a big burly pirate walking into a bar. This large pirate, I assume, is someone that is on Jack's crew, and Jack makes his way to a booth in the back of the bar where another pirate is waiting for him. It looks like Jack is trying to make a deal with this guy, but we see Jack is beginning to enact a plan here, and although we don't really know what this plan is, the next page has a character that looks very similar to John from the Young Jack Sparrow books. We don't really know if this is actually John or not, but I am going to assume it is him. As we will see when we cover the Legends of the Brethren Court book series next, John will actually show up in that series. So this comic looks to be set around that same time frame maybe, and John is, I would assume, in his mid-20s like he is in that book series. He has a bit of facial hair too, but his trademark curly hair is still the same. John is in on whatever scheme Jack is trying to pull here, but then we see another character who is wearing a powdered wig and looks to be drunk. He seems like he is also part of Jack's plan, but then we see Jack go over to a mysterious figure in the corner with his face cloaked in shadow. And that is all we have from this comic. This one seemed really cool, especially with John showing up here too. I would have loved to know what this comic was about, but that's all we have for this one. The last one that was unpublished is the one that I am the most saddened we lost. And this is a young Jack Sparrow comic. This one features the whole crew: Jack, Arabella, Fitzwilliam, Tuman, John, and Constance aboard the Barnacle. We have 6 pages of this comic, no dialogue of course, but let's speculate on the story. So the first page is a really cool full-page panel of the Barnacle in a storm, and the crew are doing what they do best. Jack is steering the ship through the storm, Fitzy is casually chilling and sitting on a barrel doing what he does best, and we also see Constance looking panicked as water spills onto the deck. Arabella is trying to help Tuman not fall from the mast, and John is stuck in the sail, looking like he is going to be the one who's going to fall. But the next page sees Jack getting drenched by a wave, and it looks like the rest of the crew is now below decks. We see Fitzy peeking out from the hatch, and Jack stomps on top of it, hitting Fitzy in the head. But Jack rummages through a barrel to find something, and on the next page we see him flying down the stairs going below deck. There's a few panels here of Jack and Fitzy arguing with each other, which of course is what they do best. Glad to see that's still here. But Jack then shows them the map that he was rummaging around for earlier, and it seems like Fitzy makes a joke about it and Jack says something in return, which then has the whole crew laughing at him. But the next page shows us what is on this map, and we see the words Fountain of Youth in large lettering at the top. But this is clearly not a real map to the Fountain of Youth, however, as it says Child below the title, and it also shows the area of New York with Staten Island and Brooklyn as landmarks. It then says at the bottom, located just minutes from Manhattan, along with an illustration of a kid in a pool of water. So clearly this is just for some tourist attraction, but with the Fountain of Youth being brought up here, it definitely seemed like this was supposed to maybe tie in with On Stranger Tides in some kind of way. The last page we have shows Arabella grabbing a book off the bookshelf, while Tuman looks at Jack's map. And that is all we have for this comic. It seemed very interesting, and I should also add, this comic was to be written by Rob Kidd, which of course is the pen name for the authors who wrote the Young Jack Sparrow books. So I'm assuming it would have been one of those authors writing this story. But with the Fountain of Youth involved and the fact that this book was to tie in with the release of On Stranger Tides, it is definitely plausible that this is where Jack learns some information about the real fountain, probably from Arabella, who of course knows all about the legends and myths of the sea. But that is it for this story, and I just want to say the art for this particular comic is so good. Getting to see colored versions of these characters in that trademark style is just awesome. Where was it published, you may ask? Well, it was put into a Disney magazine at the time called Disney Presents Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, the official movie guide. You can look this up online and purchase a copy of it on eBay, as there are some for sale there. That's where I got my copy. But this comic is called Strangers Bearing Gifts, and it takes place before the Curse of the Black Pearl, and it is specifically after the mutiny against Jack and after Barbossa and the crew of the Pearl get cursed by the Aztec gold. So they're trying to find a way to break the curse, and they stumble upon a castaway that promises to set them free. Since we do have the full complete comic for this one, I'm going to read the whole thing here, so let's go and get into it. So, Strangers Bearing Gifts begins with Barbossa doing a bit of narration, which is of course what he does best. So Barbossa starts and says, "You see, 'twas the sun that was his own undoing, and so he flapped his bare arms, and being without wings, he got a grip of no breezes, and his mouth, shouting his father's name, was received by the dark blue water, which has drawn his name from him. The Black Pearl," the narrator says, "crew, cursed." Then we go back to Barbossa. "The elements killed him, but to feel what he felt, even for a brief moment, warmth." And then we see someone say, "Ain't that the tale of Ichabod? It's the legend of Ichabod." And here we see Pintel and Ragetti. And Barbossa says, "It be the story of Icarus." And Pintel says, "Love to have me wings of wax." And Ragetti asks, "Why would you want wings of wax?" And Pintel says, "So I could fly." And Ragetti's like, "Oh, yeah." And Ragetti's like, "Wait, why not wings of feathers?" or canvas, like sails on your arms. And Barbossa says, oh, it's more of a metaphor. You not be very well read in the classics. And Pintel then says, you heard him, we should be more well read. And he slaps Ragetti on the back, and Ragetti's currently looking through a spyglass, and he says, careful, almost poked my eye out. And Pintel says, almost poked my eye out, ha ha. And Ragetti says, besides, reading wasn't exactly a prerequisite for being a pirate now, was it? And Pintel says, how did we become pirates anyway? And Ragetti says, castaway. And Pintel says, nah, pretty sure we was recruited. No, we was... And then Ragetti interrupts him and says, man overboard, as he sees a young boy on a piece of driftwood out in the ocean. A few minutes later, the crew brings this boy on board the Pearl, and we see one of the pirates says, he's breathing, right enough. Wonder if little Spanish boys dream in Spanish. And Barbossa says, bosun, get him below. Ragetti, stop your blathering and find something from the galley to get his strength back. And then Ragetti says, but I was the one who did the finding. And Barbossa says, aye, and now we've altered course to accommodate your finding. So unless you want to be the one throwing a wee little boy back overboard so we can get underway. And Ragetti says, think I'll make a stew? And Barbossa says, aye, make a stew. The rest of you, get back to work. And then we see Pintel come up to Barbossa and he says, Captain, something awful must have gotten at that ship, eh? For only the boy to survive. And Barbossa says, something awful indeed, Mr. Pintel. Here is hoping the boy can shed a little light on the situation. And Pintel says, what situation? Barbossa then asks, where be the crew, Pintel? And Pintel says, dead. And Barbossa then asks again, where be the bodies? And Pintel's like, sharks got 'em? And then Barbossa asks one more question, then where be the blood? So after that, we then go to Barbossa and this little young boy in his cabin. And they're both speaking in Spanish, but of course, all the stuff is here in English, so I'm going to continue in English. But this young boy says, I mean no offense, sir, but this stew it's dreadful. And Barbossa says, my cook's taste buds be a little out of form, as it were. And now that you got some sustenance of sorts in your belly, I think you should be up for a mild bit of questioning. The wreck be my first bit of curiosity. And the boy says, we were attacked, Spanish Armada. And Barbossa says, the Delphin, that's the name of the ship that this boy was on, the Delphin was chartered as a fishing vessel. Now why would the Armada unleash hell on a ship under its own flag, Perhaps that has a little something to do with them shackles, which be my second curiosity, your being alive. My third, though not necessarily in that order. And this boy says, I was a prisoner on that ship. Then Barbossa says, if you don't mind my asking, what makes you valuable enough to turn the Spaniards against themselves? And then the boy says, I don't think you ever believe me. And then they're continuing to talk, but we see Pintel and Ragetti, who are listening from outside the cabin. But Barbossa says, rest assured, experience gives me a staggeringly high ability to suspend disbelief. And we see Pintel and Ragetti saying, what are they saying? Don't know. It's all Greek to me. It's Spanish. Of course I meant Spanish. It's called a turn of phrase. Then we go back into the cabin, and the boy says to Barbossa, I know where the fountain of youth is. And Barbossa says, the fountain be just a fable. Now you best start telling me the truth before the sharks be the one asking why you're wearing those shackles. And the boy says, that fable be a fact, Captain. I've seen it with my own eyes. Lost my ship and crew in the process. And Barbossa gets angry and slaps the bowl of food and the boy to the ground. And he says, now you be trying my patience, lad. And the fork flies off the table and flies into the door right next to Ragetti's eye. And by the way, Ragetti has both of his eyes currently, but we'll get to that in a second. But Barbossa says, enough games. Boy, what be your name? And the boy says, Juan Ponce de Leon. And Barbossa says, that not be possible. He be dead for over 100 years. And the boy says, well, here I am, and I'd like to make you an offer. Listen. Drank from the fountain I did, took years off my age, healed my broken bones, and cured all my ills in an instant. I'll take you to the fountain in exchange for safe passage home. So Barbossa thinks about this, And then he goes outside and says, "Drop the mainsail and change course. A cure for our ills awaits." And then we go to the narrator and says, "And as the sun begins to set," and we see Barbossa in his cabin alone, and Bosun comes in and says, "Captain, we are arriving at the cove." And Barbossa says, "Aye, this is when things begin to get interesting, Mr. Bosun." And we see Barbossa was reading a book about Greek mythology. And Pintel says, "Don't necessarily know how I'm supposed to feel about this." And Ragetti says, "Little torn myself, personally." And Barbossa says, "So, this be the place then." And the boy says, "It most certainly is." And we see this place is an horrifyingly eerie place with, in the center of it, a pillar with a boy riding a dolphin. And all around it are these pillars with dead sailors hung on poles, lashed to these poles, hanging from the columns. It's pretty horrifying. But Barbossa says, "If I might have a word, Mr. de Leon." And he says, "Yes, Captain Barbossa." And Barbossa says, "Tell me, what do you know about Greek mythology?" And the boy says, "I'm familiar, you could say." And Barbossa says, "Aye, as am I. You see that statue up there, way up high? 'Tis a young boy named Melicertes. You see, he and his mother long ago incurred the wrath of Hera. So they ran, jumped off a cliff into the sea for protection. Became powerful as gods, they did. Fable says the boy didn't go by Melicertes any longer after that." And the boy then finishes for Barbossa and says, "Fact says they call him Palaemon now." And his eyes start glowing. So we can obviously see this is not Juan Ponce de Leon. And Ragetti asks, "Who knew Ponce de Leon was a sea god?" And Pintel says, "Pretty sure the sea god took advantage of our naivete, Ragetti." And Ragetti says, "Typical." And Barbossa says, "Need sailor's blood to keep you alive, then." And Palaemon says, "No, I love sailors, but pirate souls feed my fire." And then we can see all these dead souls that are lashed and hung from all these columns in this area start to wake up as ghosts. And Barbossa says, "Pity, 'cause our souls be spoken for." And the moon comes out, and Barbossa and the whole crew turn into skeletons. And Palaemon says, "Your souls will join our ranks for the sacrifice." And Barbossa says, "Defend yourselves, lads." And then we see Barbossa is fighting with Palaemon here, and Palaemon says, "You might have mentioned being cursed, Barbossa." And Barbossa says, "Nasty little bit of business with the Aztecs." And Palaemon then says, "Then why even follow me into my trap? I am a god after all." And Barbossa says, "We already be damned, so even a slim chance of finding a cure is better than no chance. And for a god, you seem to be awfully limited." And then we see Pintel and Ragetti, who are fighting one of these ghost pirates. And Ragetti says, "On 3, 1. And then we see Bosun in the next frame, and he says, "We cannot hurt them." And then we hear Ragetti say 2. And then Ragetti says 3, and Pintel stabs at the ghost in front of him, but he goes right through the ghost, and Pintel's sword goes right into Ragetti's eye. And Pintel says, "What did he just say?" And we go back to Barbossa and Palaemon here, and Barbossa says, "You had to trick us into coming here, just like the rest of this lot." And Palaemon says, "Sacrifice of willing maritime souls keeps me alive." And Ragetti goes chasing after his eye, and he says, "Not my eye." And then we go back to Barbossa, and he says, "Reeling in crew after crew with that cockeyed fountain promise. Keeps you immortal, ageless." And Palaemon then says, "Anything else you'd like to tell me that I already know?" And Barbossa says, "You mean aside from you not letting us leave, seeing as we know how your little game works?" And Palaemon says, "Enlighten me." And Barbossa says, "We found you clinging to the driftwood like your eternal life depended on it." And Palaemon says, And Barbossa says, "Makes me wonder if you cannot swim." "Let's find out." And we see Palaemon was on the plank, and Barbossa cuts the plank, and Palaemon falls into the ocean along with Ragetti's eye. And Barbossa then says, "You folk might want to be saving your master then." And all the ghost pirates then go over into the ocean back to Palaemon. And Barbossa says, "Make sail for safer waters." And then we see, of course, the Pearl is sailing away, and we see Pintel and Ragetti, And Rigetti says, "That's it then. It's gone." And Pintel says, "Don't you worry. We'll find you a new one." And Rigetti says, "I don't want a new one." And Bosun says to Barbossa, "Captain, you learned all of that from your books, how to defeat him?" And Barbossa says, "His altar was a statue of him riding a bloody dolphin. Ironic or not, a sea god can swim. He doesn't need a dolphin." And Pintel then asks, "You think that fountain be real at all, Captain?" And Barbossa then says, "We're unliving proof that tales of the be, but tales of hope, of redemption. If there be one thing you haven't quite grasped about the illustrious Hector Barbossa, it be, I don't believe in fairy tales." And that is the end of Strangers Bearing Gifts. Alright, so now that is a really cool comic, and this art is spectacular in this one. But we have Barbossa running into the Greek god Melikertes, also known as Paimon. Obviously, Barbossa told a bit of it, but for a quick Greek mythology lesson, after Ino and her son Melikertes jump into the sea to escape Ino's husband, they are both transformed into Greek sea deities. And this is where Melikertes becomes Paimon. I love when mythology is brought into Pirates lore. It makes it so much more interesting. Kind of like how Quetzalcoatl was brought into the Young Jack Sparrow books and this Greek mythology stuff being brought into this comic. It's just always super cool. But there is a plot hole in this comic, as you might have found out, as I, specified, as it depicts Rigetti losing his eye. But in The Price of Freedom, which is set years before this comic, when we see Rigetti in Shipwreck Cove, he has already lost his eye. Of course, it wouldn't be Pirates of the Caribbean without a good old-fashioned plot hole, but that is everything about Six Sea Shanties, and another unfortunate case of a cool Pirates thing getting canceled. But let's jump into the next piece of media here, and this isn't something that was outright canceled, but I wanted to bring it up. So we just finished covering The Price of Freedom, and you should listen to those episodes if you haven't already. But that book ends with Esmeralda still being the Pirate Lord of the Caribbean. But when we see Jack Sparrow in the Legends of the Brethren Court book series, which is set after The Price of Freedom, he is already the Pirate Lord of the Caribbean. A.C. Crispin, who wrote The Price of Freedom, had an idea about what would happen to Esmeralda and how Jack would become the Pirate Lord of the Caribbean, but she wanted to leave it for another book. However, Disney never contracted her to write the story, and since Crispin passed away in 2013, we will never get the story that she had in mind. I would have loved to get another novel like The Price of Freedom from her, although given how long it took her to write The Price of Freedom, it probably would have gone unfinished when she passed away if Disney actually wanted her to write it. But it is interesting to think about how the transfer of the title would have gone. Would Esmeralda die and pass it on to Jack like Sao Fang did with Elizabeth, or would she give the title to him willingly? We unfortunately will never know, but I mainly wanted to bring this up here as it is another piece of Pirates media that will never see the light of day. And so the last piece of media I wanted to cover on this episode is something that some of you may know about. And once again, this is another piece of canceled Pirates media. Isn't it crazy how much of this there is? Anyway, this is another book, and it was called The Secret Diary of Rigetti. And it was written by none other than Mackenzie Crook himself, who of course played Rigetti in the movies. This book would have explained Rigetti's backstory, and potentially would have shown him meeting Pintel and the beginning of their relationship. It would have been written in a journal style, so like a first-person book, and it was supposed to be released in October of 2009. Apparently, the page count was 96 pages, and that is everything we know about it. It was on track to be released, as I think they announced it was coming out, but it quietly disappeared, and no one has heard about anything about it since. This would have been a really cool book to have, and especially it being written by Mackenzie Crook himself is super awesome. Getting to see how he meets Pintel is obviously what we would all love to see, and just learning about Rigetti's backstory would be super, super cool. But who knows, maybe Mackenzie Crook is the only person in the world with a copy of this book. Maybe he has it sitting on his bookshelf, but I still don't really know why this was canceled. Yeah, it's just, once again, another thing that Disney canceled for Pirates of the Caribbean. But that finally brings us to an end to this deep dive into the forgotten, weird, and canceled media of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. I hope you enjoyed this special episode, and thank you once again for sticking with the podcast for 50 episodes. It is insane that I've made it this far, and it's all thanks to your support. I'm very happy at this little Pirates of the Caribbean community that has embraced this podcast, and thank you for allowing me to continuously share my passion for this franchise. These characters and movies, rides, books, and everything, they mean so much to me, and I know they do to you as well. Thank you for sticking with me for 50 episodes, and here's to 50 more. Let's hit episode 100 next. Up next on the podcast, we are going to be diving into the Legends of the Brethren Court book series, and we have 5 books to cover there. So I hope you will join me next time for the start of that journey. Thank you for rating or reviewing if you have been kind enough to do so, and if you have bought merch, thank you for going that extra mile to support me. But if all you do is listen to these episodes, please know that is all I need. Knowing that I've maybe put a smile on someone's face or helped them have a better day is the best feeling in the world. So thank you once again. Thanks for listening, and I will see you all next time for Legends of the Brethren Court. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram and Threads at Podcast of the Caribbean, and over on Twitter/X and Bluesky at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia over there, so make sure to check those platforms out. You can also buy merchandise for the podcast over on Dashery. Be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.